What if the absolute best spokesperson for a massive global movement is the one who refuses to sell anything at all?
Right. The one who just steps back entirely.
Exactly. Today, we're looking at a text that takes the megaphone away from the street preacher and, hands it directly to the introvert.
Which is a pretty radical shift.
It really is. So, welcome to today's deep dive. If you're listening to this, you probably have a very specific image that pops into your head when you hear the word evangelism.
Oh, almost certainly.
Yeah, and usually it's loud, it's huge. We picture these massive stadium crusades with tens of thousands of seats. Or maybe that incredibly awkward moment when a stranger knocks on your front door with a really heavy, uncomfortable sales pitch.
Yeah, it's true. The cultural baggage around that word is just incredibly heavy. We tend to view evangelism as this highly orchestrated event or like a rigid transaction.
Right.
Basically, the text argues we see it as an uncomfortable extracurricular activity reserved for a select few, extroverted professionals who actually like knocking on doors.
But when you step into the source material we are unpacking today, that entire corporate transactional image gets completely dismantled.
It really does.
We're exploring excerpts from the 2021 book Evangelism by Rian Engelbrecht. And our mission for this deep dive is to look at how this book redefines the whole concept. We're going to explore how sharing this message is actually, according to the author, deeply tied to your specific individual personality type.
Yeah, your natural wiring.
Right. And we'll also examine what the text calls the absolute non-negotiable core of it all, which is the message of the cross.
And Engelbrecht establishes the tone right out of the gate by framing this not as an optional hobby, but as the fundamental, inescapable duty of every single believer.
Wow. Inescapable duty.
Yeah, it is presented as a universal call. The book's premise is that if you are a participant in the faith, you are on the hook to share it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand that universal call, we have to look at how the book strips away all our modern preconceived notions and goes right back to the linguistic roots.
The Greek roots, specifically.
Right. Engelbrecht points out that the English word evangelism actually comes from the Greek root eugelion, which translates simply to good news, or, in its verb form, to announce or bring good news.
And the simplicity of that definition is really the foundation of the author's whole premise here.
Just good news.
Exactly. If we follow the book's logic, it strips away the quotas, the pressure, the mechanics of modern ministry, and boils it all down to the natural act of sharing something positive. There's actually a pretty heavy quote included in the text from the 19th century preacher Charles Spurgeon.
Oh, right, the imposter quote.
Yeah, he said, "Every Christian is either a missionary or an imposter."
That is a harsh line, calling someone an imposter, but it kind of makes sense if you think about basic human nature.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you're listening right now and you go see just a mind-blowing movie, or you find a restaurant that serves the best tacos you've ever had in your life.
You're going to talk about it.
Right. Your very first instinct is to text your friends. You want to share it. Keeping it a secret is actually the unnatural choice in that scenario.
That's a great analogy.
So following the text's argument, if someone genuinely believes they possess the greatest news in the history of the universe, staying silent about it would be a fundamental contradiction of that belief.
Precisely. And the book emphasizes that this sharing doesn't start with, buying a plane ticket to a remote jungle.
Thank goodness.
Right. Engelbrecht uses the biblical concept of Jerusalem, referencing the book of Acts. The idea presented is that your Jerusalem is your immediate home base. Your family, your close friends, your coworkers.
The people you already know.
Exactly. The text argues that the movement is supposed to start in your immediate sphere of influence, building on pre-existing trust, before it ever spreads outward to what it calls the uttermost parts of the earth.
I really love that focus on pre-existing trust because it completely distances this concept from, say, a multi-level marketing scheme. You aren't just cold calling strangers to hit a monthly quota of souls.
And that's a crucial distinction the author makes. The text is highly critical of the salesman approach, where believers tally up converts to, prove their spiritual worth.
Right, like an employee of the month board.
Yeah, exactly. The theological argument presented here is that human beings actually cannot save a single soul themselves.
Wait, really?
Yeah. According to the book, the role of the evangelist within this framework is just to deliver the message authentically and clearly. After that, they're supposed to trust God with the results.
So the pressure is just off.
The pressure to close the deal is entirely removed, yes.
Which sets up an incredible tension, if you think about it. If you don't have to close the deal, You just have to deliver the message. Well, what exactly is the message?
That's the big question.
Because we live in a culture that absolutely hates being offended. And Engelbrecht argues that while the delivery of the message can be flexible, the core message itself is highly offensive and completely non-negotiable.
Yeah, and to explain that non-negotiable core, the book relies on a classic theological analogy, which is the chasm.
The chasm between God and man.
Right. The premise presented is that God, who is perfectly holy, is on one side, and fallen, inherently sinful humanity is on the other. Because of human rebellion, the text argues there is a massive, uncrossable chasm between the two.
And so Jesus comes in as the bridge.
Exactly. The argument is that Jesus, fully God and fully man, acts as the only possible bridge for reconciliation, paying the debt of human sin through his death on the cross.
And Engelbrecht uses a really visceral metaphor to drive this home. He calls the cross the skeleton of the gospel.
Oh, the skeleton metaphor is fascinating.
Yeah, so if you look at a human body and you just magically remove the skeleton, you don't have a person anymore, right? You just have a pile of mush on the floor.
A very graphic image, but effective.
Very. In the same way, the text asserts that if you remove the cross and the reality of sin just to make the message more palatable to people, you don't have Christianity anymore. You have a pile of theological mush.
It's a striking image, and the author freely acknowledges that this specific, rigid message is incredibly grating to modern sensibilities.
Oh, for sure.
The text even notes that the Apostle Paul called the message of the cross foolishness to the perishing world.
I have to put myself in the shoes of someone hearing this today, though. I mean, I have to push back a little. In a modern world that really prizes self-made success and independence, this is a tough pill to swallow.
Oh, absolutely.
We live in an era of moral relativism. You know, the idea that your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth. So walking up to someone and saying, actually, you are fundamentally flawed, your ego is an illusion, and you are completely helpless to save yourself.
It sounds incredibly confrontational.
It does. How does the book reconcile that harsh reality with the literal definition of euangelion we just talked about, which means good news?
Well, that is the ultimate paradox of the text, and Engelbrecht answers it by pointing to the biblical account of the temple veil.
Oh, the veil, right.
Yeah, so in the ancient Jewish temple, there was a massive, incredibly thick curtain, the veil, that separated the Holy of Holies from the general public.
And the Holy of Holies was like the direct presence of God.
Exactly, the unfiltered presence. And only the high priest could go in, and only once a year. But the historical accounts state that at the exact moment of Jesus' death on the cross, that veil tore right down the middle.
Meaning the barrier was destroyed.
Exactly. The tearing of the veil symbolizes the actual good news, which the author defines as unprecedented, completely free access to the Creator for every single person.
Oh, wow.
So the argument is that the bad news of human flaw is necessary to understand the magnitude of the good news of access. The cross isn't presented just as a symbol of gruesome death. It is framed as the definitive act of love.
The book also brings up that fascinating Greek accounting term here, right?
Tetelestai.
Yes, tetelestai. It's what Jesus is recorded as saying right before he died, and it literally translates to paid in full.
Paid in full.
Yeah, the argument is that the massive unpayable debt of human failing has been wiped off the ledger. And that, according to the book, is the good news. Okay, so the message, that skeleton of the cross, the reality of the chasm, the payment in full to text, says that cannot be altered. But here's where it gets really interesting.
The delivery methods.
Yes. If the message is completely rigid, does that mean you have to be rigid in how you deliver it? The book says absolutely not. This is where Engelbrecht introduces the idea of personality-driven methods.
And this section shifts from heavy theology into really practical psychology. The author outlines 5 distinct styles for sharing this message, directly refuting the idea that every Christian has to act like a loud, table-pounding preacher to be effective.
If you're listening to this and you're an introvert, this is where you can breathe a massive sigh of relief.
Truly.
Because reading this reminded me of modern workplace personality tests, like Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram. I mean, in the corporate world, you wouldn't force your most analytical, quiet software engineer to go hype up a crowd at a marketing convention.
That would be a disaster.
A total disaster. And you wouldn't put an aggressive, confrontational salesperson in charge of a really delicate HR dispute. Engelbrecht is basically applying modern psychological sustainability to an ancient religious practice.
It's a highly effective framework. Let's look at how the book defines these 5 styles using biblical archetypes.
Let's do it.
The first is the confrontational style. The author points to the Apostle Peter. At Pentecost, which was a massive gathering where the early church essentially went public, Peter stood up and boldly confronted thousands of people. He didn't mince words.
Right. We all have that one guy with a megaphone in the town square pictured in our heads right now.
Yep, the classic image.
But the book argues that while it shouldn't be the only method, some people genuinely are wired to be direct, and some listeners actually need that blunt truth to wake up.
Exactly.
But for everyone else, we have the complete opposite end of the spectrum, which is the intellectual style.
Right. For the intellectual style, the text points to the Apostle Paul speaking to the Greek philosophers in Athens.
He didn't just yell at them, right?
No, he didn't just yell repent. He used apologetics, which is the reasoned, logical defense of the faith. He debated them using their own cultural idols and logic.
So this is for the thinkers.
Yes, this style is for the analytical minds who need data, historical evidence, and philosophical consistency before they can believe anything.
But what if you aren't a debater or a public speaker? The third style is the invitational style, and the archetype here is the tax collector, Matthew.
I love this one.
So relatable. When Matthew decided to follow Jesus, what was his immediate evangelistic strategy? He threw a dinner party, he just invited his friends over.
The mechanism of the invitational style is entirely relationship-based. It relies on hospitality. You build trust over, chicks and salsa, and eventually the conversation naturally turns to deeper things.
Which takes the pressure off entirely.
It does. It removes the artificial pressure of a sales pitch because you are genuinely just being a friend.
Which is so much less intimidating.
Yeah.
Then you have the fourth style, which is the testimonial style. This is entirely experiential.
Right. Engelbrecht references the man who was born blind and healed by Jesus.
Yeah, and when the religious leaders aggressively interrogated him, he didn't use deep apologetics or try to debate theology with them.
No, he essentially just said, look, I don't know all the answers to your philosophical questions, but I do know this. I was blind and now I see.
It's just his story.
And it is incredibly difficult to argue with someone's personal experience of transformation.
Totally. And finally, the fifth style is servanthood. This is for people who might never feel comfortable preaching with words, but who speak volumes through action. The author points to the parable of the Good Samaritan or modern figures like Mother Teresa.
Right, doing the actual work.
I want to push back on that one for a second, though. If I'm just serving soup at a homeless shelter or, mowing my neighbor's lawn, how does that cross the bridge into evangelism? Aren't I just being a nice person?
Well, that is a critical distinction to make. The book argues that servanthood evangelism isn't just being nice, it's about earning the right to be heard.
Earning the right.
Okay. When you demonstrate the love of God by physically serving someone's needs, it validates the words that come later. The argument is that the action creates a runway for the non-negotiable message of the cross to actually land because the person receiving the help knows you genuinely care about them.
That makes perfect sense. So if you force an introverted servant to do confrontational street preaching, they will burn out in a week, and it's going to feel totally manipulative to the listener.
Oh, 100%.
By letting people operate within their natural wiring, authenticity becomes the vehicle that carries the message.
Exactly. But, and this is and even if you perfectly match your communication style to your personality, you are going to hit a brick wall if the person you're talking to isn't ready to hear it.
Right.
Which brings us to the listener's readiness. The book spends significant time on audience analysis.
Because knowing your communication style is really only half the battle. Engelbrecht categorizes the readiness of the listener into 4 distinct stages: hostile, skeptic, spectator, and seeker. And the text insists that you have to approach each stage very differently.
The overarching advice here is to act as a friend of sinners, which is a title historically given to Jesus. The author argues that being a friend requires deep listening and respect rather than what he calls Bible bashing.
Right. Think about being cornered at a Thanksgiving dinner by an argumentative relative who is completely hostile to religion.
We've all been there.
We really have.
Yeah.
If someone is in that first stage, actively hostile or deeply skeptical, what is the actual strategy the text suggests here? How do you move them from hostility to genuine seeking?
The author's advice is surprisingly measured, honestly. You ask questions and you listen. You don't match their hostility.
So no yelling back.
No yelling. Instead, you try to diagnose the actual source of their anger or doubt. Is it a genuine intellectual hurdle, or is it maybe a past trauma from a hypocritical religious institution?
That makes a huge difference.
It does. The book reminds the believer that their job is just to sow the seed. Someone who is hostile at Thanksgiving this year might soften and become a seeker next year simply because you handled that initial interaction with respect rather than defensiveness.
And to illustrate this eagerness to engage with the seeker, the text highlights a really vivid biblical story, the story of Philip and the Ethiopian official.
Ah, yes.
Philip sees this foreign official riding in a chariot, reading a religious text, and looking completely confused. And the detail Engelbrecht emphasizes is that Philip actually ran to the chariot.
He ran. It denotes incredible eagerness. It wasn't a burdensome chore for him. And notice the mechanism of how Philip engaged. He didn't start by preaching a sermon at the chariot.
Right, he didn't just start yelling facts.
No, he started by asking a diagnostic question. Do you understand what you are reading? The text points out that he met the man exactly where he was, recognized his did for a guide, and walked him through the text personally.
And that intimate one-on-one interaction of the chariot sets up one of the most compelling arguments in the entire book. Engelbrecht uses this story to mount a heavy critique against those massive stadium crusades we talked about at the beginning of the deep dive.
He really does. The author strongly advocates for a concept he calls the value of one. He references the famous parable where a shepherd leaves his flock of 99 safe sheep to go out into the dangerous mountains to find the one single sheep that wandered off.
The value of one.
Yes. The underlying argument here is that true discipleship is incredibly labor-intensive.
Engelbrecht actually writes, and I'll quote here, "Mass evangelism through crusades can never replace real discipleship, for it replaces the value of the one with the needs of the collective."
It's a bold statement.
It is. He points out that while Jesus certainly ministered to large crowds, he spent 3 years pouring his life into just 12 guys.
It's a profound critique of how we measure success. The text suggests that real, lasting transformation doesn't happen on a macro, stadium-level scale. It happens on a micro level.
One-on-one.
Exactly. It requires time, immense patience, and a willingness to sit across the table from one person and walk with them through their unique doubts and struggles. Shallow seeds scattered over a stadium might sprout quickly, but deep roots require one-on-one investment.
So what does this all mean? If we pull all these threads together from Rian Engelbrecht's text, we are looking at a massive paradigm shift.
You really are.
The book presents evangelism not as a rigid corporate sales strategy for the extroverted elite, but as a universal call for every believer. It's a call to share a deeply confrontational, non-negotiable message, the reality of the cross, the chasm of sin, and the payment in full, but to do so through highly individualized, personality-driven methods.
Right.
Whether you are confronting the crowd, reasoning with the skeptics, inviting friends to dinner, testifying to your own healing, or just silently serving the marginalized, the ultimate priority must always be the immense, irreplaceable value of the individual person sitting right in front of you.
It is a remarkable framework that manages to balance absolute theological rigidity regarding the core message with complete psychological flexibility regarding the messenger.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought for you to consider. We live in a digital age that is absolutely obsessed with going viral.
Oh, completely obsessed.
Right. Our culture deeply values maximizing our reach, scaling our platforms, and speaking to millions of anonymous followers all at the exact same time. But if you consider Engelbrecht's premise, how does this ancient concept of the value of one, the willingness to leave the 99 behind, just to deeply listen to, understand, and mentor a single individual, challenge our current metrics for what we consider a successful or truly impactful life?
That is a question worth sitting with.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.